Well, for more on this, let's speak with Ambassador Dennis Ross, a Middle East peace negotiator and former special assistant to President Obama, as well as a counsel and distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and he's joining us from Washington, D.C. Ambassador Ross, thanks for joining us. First of all, I'd like to get your response to that statement from the State Department. Especially, it strikes me the statements on the tensions around the Temple Mount are what you would expect. But in terms of the conflicts in Sheikh Jarrah and the Silwan neighborhood, which isn't even right now an issue, maybe the Biden administration being a little sharper than some observers might have expected.
Well, I think actually you put your finger on something that's interesting. There's no question, the minute you touch the Temple Mount or the Al-Aqsa Mosque, you touch Jerusalem more generally, you obviously want to recognize that that has a tremendous potential to ignite not just tensions, but unfortunately violence as well. So having a statement related to that makes perfect sense. It is interesting the State Department felt obliged to weigh in on Sheikh Jarrah, which is understandable at this point because it's become a kind of flashpoint for tension, and the evictions at this point, in a sense of the possibility of evictions, has clearly been kind of a catalyst for what we were seeing, at least in that neighborhood. But it says something, I think, about the administration that on these kinds of issues, it will weigh in. Now, to be fair to them, it's the confluence of all these things. I mean, it's the fact of the possibility of evictions as you approach the end of Ramadan on Jerusalem Day. These are an unusual confluence of circumstances that really has the potential to ignite something. And I think that maybe more than anything else accounts for the decision to include that statement, include it in the broader statement.
Right. Now, Israel or the Netanyahu government likely expected something along these lines from the Biden administration. I want to go address a foreign reaction. Maybe that government may be a little even more concerned about. It's from the United Arab Emirates, which its Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a statement saying the UAE strongly condemns Israeli authorities' storming of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque, stressing the need for the Israeli authorities to assume their responsibilities in accordance with the rules of international law to protect Palestinian civilians' right to practice their religion and to prevent practices that violate the sanctity of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque. And here, Dennis, probably the sharpest comment that I can recall coming from the UAE regarding Israeli behavior since the signing of the Abraham Accords there. And maybe that has caught the notice of the Israeli government.
Well, again, you touch anything related to the Haram al-Sharif or the Temple Mount, and that's something that is much more difficult to control. And if you're sitting in the Emirates and you value the peace that you've concluded with Israel, which is clear that they do, you also have to be sensitive to anything that touches the religious sites in Jerusalem that can obviously put you on the defensive. So I think it would be surprising that they would not have made a statement after the events, because again, none of these events take place without cameras. You know, everybody has a cell phone that takes a video, and those who want to create the worst possible images are pretty quick to try to show them. So it's pretty hard, I think, for the Emirates not to make some sort of a statement. And obviously, I think the last thing the Israeli government wants at this point is a real flare-up around the Temple Mount. Jerusalem generally it's a problem for everybody. So this is something you want to manage. It's not something you want to see take on a life of its own and create kind of momentum, which sometimes also takes on a life of its own as it relates to violence and sort of the tit for tat.
Now, we have discussed on this program, and you have discussed on the program, that the Biden administration, though in some policies is a return more to the Obama era back from the Trump White House, though it is going to be cautious about stepping back into a restart of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. But of course, events move on and develop here on their own accord. And I wonder if you think, this flare-up in Jerusalem, together with the possibility of a change in government here that will include, of course, some elements that are more open, at least to the idea of a two-state solution, could tempt the Biden administration now to step in and say, look, we tried holding back, but we're being overtaken by events.
I mean, it's a very good question. And I've often said that, any administration that thinks that it can ignore the Middle East finds out that the Middle East doesn't ignore them. So it certainly is a sort of thing that could raise the level of attention. I still don't see it fundamentally changing the instinct in terms of priorities. There is a conviction on the part of the administration that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not one that can be solved right now. That argues more for figuring out ways to manage it. It argues more for trying to improve the circumstances on the ground. It argues more for trying to change the circumstances so that what is not possible today could become possible over time. All of that may argue for a certain level of diplomacy. It probably does not argue in their minds at this stage for any kind of high-level initiative. The last thing I think they feel that is necessary is a high-level initiative that fails. All that will do is deepen the sense of cynicism and the sense of impossibility. So will there be attention paid to this? Yes. Is it going to transform the way the administration approaches the issue? I wouldn't say that at this point, but as I said at the outset in answer to your question, the idea that you can simply manage this at a distance, that may require some rethinking. It may require a certain level, a different level of diplomacy.
Right.
It may also require thinking more how you build on the normalization process as a way of also using that to try to break the stalemate between Israelis and Palestinians.
All right, Ambassador Dennis Ross, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.